All right, we'll call this meeting back to order, call the meeting to order. Workshop. I'd like to ask, we don't need a roll call, it's not on here, but
I'm still here.
we all are.
I'm still
I'd like to ask everybody to rise for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have anybody signed up for open forum?
Nope.
No. All right, we'll move on to the 180th Task Force creation. Dan, do you have
I do.
a?
Many members of the council, just to provide just a little bit of background on this discussion. On the screens in front of you is a kind of a closer up view that's included in the council packet. This kind of shows the location of 170th versus 180th. Basically, this conversation kind of started at the beginning of this year. The city met with the city of Columbus to discuss the potential for making the recommendation for an interchange at 180th Street versus the location at 170th Street. Years ago, probably late 90s, early 2000, there was a group that got together and consisted of Forest Lake, Scandia, Hugo, Lino, Washington, Nook County. So there was some work that was kind of presented to look at if there was an interchange added. They looked at making, their recommendation at that time was for 170th. However, if you kind of look closely at 170th, there is this section over here, which is where the mouse pointer is right now, this gray striped area. A lot of that is wetland area, so the potential cost of if this ever were to be constructed, theoretically would be pretty high because without being fully studied, just kind of initially looking at it, you're looking at probably having to do quite a bit of bridging work to get the road through here. So the thought is, if you look at the 180th, which is the green line up here, this may be a more logical choice to put the interchange at, just because there's not this potential for having to cross all of this wetland area, as well as this area has also been changed over to a regional park. So there's some potential hurdles that the 180th interchange does present, or excuse me, the 170th that does present. So back in March, the City of Forest Lake City Council and the City Council from Columbus got together and looked at, is there any interest in pursuing a interchange at 180th? And at that time, the consensus between the two groups was, yes, there is some, kind of keep this project moving forward. There's been a couple of other more informal meetings that have kind of taken place since that meeting in March, where again, we haven't like dived down, there hasn't been any work in terms of like cost or anything like that. It's just kind of more along the lines of developing a strategy to how do you kind of lobby for this 180th interchange versus the 170th. So what's being presented tonight is if this idea for pursuit of an interchange at 180th were to kind of take the next step, the recommendation would be to form a task force or some sort of joint, not a joint powers agreement, but a group of different communities that would get together that would be kind of tasked with the work of taking and doing some of that deeper analysis work on the potential for an interchange at 180th. The reason why we're looking at 180th was obviously it's located in Forest Lake, so we would have the ability to develop the land that would be adjacent to it in more of a industrial fashion versus more residential. So there would be some benefit from the City of Forest Lake's perspective to do a development at 180th. However, there is there is a little bit of headwind against this project. Some of the other groups have either kind of expressed no interest in really pursuing this or tepid interest. It's kind of been lukewarm. But again, the task force, the invitation would go out to the community, surrounding communities, all the kind of other counties that would be adjacent to this project, just to kind of see if we couldn't kind of have those conversations, again, to take a look at, is 180 still on the cards? Is that still the preferred option? Or excuse me, 170 is still the preferred option? Or do we want to migrate and put support for 180th? I think it's one thing that, as this conversation has kind of started out, is that if it's a split force in terms of trying to lobby at a federal level, if half of people are, locally are going for 170th, half are going for 180th, basically both options are going to be, it's going to be tough to get either option built. So there was kind of some conversation at the beginning of this where basically we're just trying to build a coalition for 180th and or 170th, and basically, kind of let the best option prevail at this point, because we would need a unified force to kind of lobby at a higher level than just the regional thing. Because the first thing federal regulators are going to look at and say, if you guys are split on the ground, that project basically has no shot moving forward. However, as we kind of looked at this, the 180th does have some, potential benefits just from a construction perspective, some lower cost estimates that are potentially associated with it. However, there is also some, potential challenges here too, with there's no road connection that's existing there like there is with, some of the stuff on 170th. So I guess the ask at this point is if there is desire on the council's perspective to establish a task force, to start looking for some of the parameters of what you guys are looking for, what would you want to put on that task force, invitation, who you want to invite to the table moving forward. And then based on that feedback from tonight, we could start doing some of that work, get those letters drafted, get those, get the work done at the staff level to kind of start the task force creation for 180th. So at this point, it's more of the conversation to kind of get some direction as to what a task force would look like if there is interest in creating the task force. And at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Well, thanks, Dan. I kind of started the idea of the task force. When you look at a lot of the other projects in the area, 35 Task Force, North Metro Water Task Force, Highway 8 has a task force. I think it gives us another tool, some more leverage to get something accomplished. I think a couple of the preliminary goals of this would be, a little more in-depth feasibility study and, cost. And not only feasibility at 180th, but, is 170th even feasible? The reality is, they've had this planned at 170th for 20 years or more, and it's no closer to getting accomplished than it was the day they came out with a plan. And I don't see it happening. Not only is a regional park and a wetland, but, that's the start of the Rice Creek, the St. Paul Utilities water intake as well. I don't think they want, bridges with cars going over it. I think there's a huge amount of advantages to 180th for all four communities involved, for both counties that are involved, for the whole area. It is reflected in our comp plan that's coming up. And I just think it's a great way to reach out to some of the other communities and get their involvement with it, get some more input on it as well. It attaches to 35E as well as 35W, without adding, obviously road improvements, but we're not adding new roads versus, we're 180th or 170th would be a whole new road getting built for, if it could even be built. This is, I believe, a lot more cost effective. It may even result in reverse commuting where, people aren't driving to the cities all the time, but actually create jobs up here. So I just think for what it's going to take to create this task force, which is very little, just getting people in on the task force, it'd be a great way to help all the communities move forward. Look for any other.
I think if you do that, Ben, you'd want to keep that task force kind of a small number, 3-4 people probably. I certainly like the idea though, because of the conversation that takes place,
Even one or two members of, each of the communities.
Yeah, right.
As well as other, interested parties, including, the counties and or, I don't know, the watershed district would be another one that would make sense too. We can invite them, whether they're all gonna participate or not.
I just mean that the ultimate idea of just the concept, to get past that and then include, the watershed district and all the rest of them, Because if there's a bunch of pushback from the neighbors or whatever, for whatever reason, we could find that out first, I think.
Well, so far, Columbus is 100% behind it. I think as we are, Lino is more, wait and see, because it doesn't really affect them very significantly. Both of the counties are, we spent an awful lot of money on 97, especially in Anoka County. So they're not interested in buying into something that's gonna cost them money, but obviously their support, if we're going after federal or state dollars to get this done, I think that would be there as well. But we have to put the package together. We have to have a proposal. We have to have something that, they can hold in their hand and that makes sense and it really sells the project. Mara?
So question on timing on how does your proposal of putting together this task force relate to timing on feedback from interagencies on comp plans? I think that comp plan feedback is going to give us a strong indication of who might be interested. And then perhaps that's your starting spot for, here's your beginning coalition, and work through that comp plan process and reconciliation on trying to get more parties on board. I'm not sure what we have for feedback yet from agencies or other jurisdictions.
I mean, as far as I know at this point, I know MnDOT has come back and said they're not in support of it.
Not in support?
Yeah, MnDOT, basically their first comment. I don't know about the other surrounding communities. I did hear from, talk to them about, kind of what the latest versions of that, feedback were. I don't think we've gotten the surrounding communities full feedback on the rest of it, on this particular one, but MnDOT, when they kind of came back, gave the boilerplate, we're not in support of an interchange at 180th. So, I mean, there's kind of, like I said, I mean, there is a little bit, this project, in my mind, does have some headwinds. You're not, it's not gonna be smooth sailing against that. There's a little bit of, analysis work that would need to be done if it does go forward. And, and I think a key indicator too is that if, 180th, after kind of going through that, the task force realizes that, what, it may make more sense for 170. I think that we would need to at least acknowledge that and get it back on board with 170, because again, I think the key as an interchange in this area is going to benefit the region, and I think we got to keep that, perspective in the back of mind too, where it's better to have an interchange than no interchange at all in this area. So I know some of the other jurisdictions that I had talked to kind of casually had just kind of said, we can have a conversation about 180th, but we can't, we can't settle on 180th, we don't want to go and split forces is, one of the first things that was discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Is 180th the city limit for us?
It is, yeah.
And Hugo would share that.
Correct.
I mean, I think 180th is the way to go.
Actually, 180th is, and Elmcrest, right there, is the corner of the four communities. So Forsyth, Columbus, Lino, and Hugo.
Makes plenty of sense to put it there. Kind of along Sam's note there, keeping it small, I think keeps it productive, but I'd like to see at least 2 people from each group, because you're gonna find conflicting opinions even within the group. So,
Oh, definitely.
So small from number of people from Forest Lake, but I think you're looking for as many communities as you can get at the table, right? I mean, if you can get Anoka County and Washington County and.
Yeah, I guess my thought was to go around with a task force and talk to all these different
Right.
people. That's, rather than have 20 people following you around. The other thing I think we should really consider here is if there's a lot of pushback from MnDOT and the feds and everybody else, is that it might be more palatable to them if we just had the interchange going on 35E. You can go north or south. The worst thing that would happen, if you're headed south, you want to get back on at 35W, you just go back onto the loop and be right back around there on 694. And so you could all follow all the way around to the south side of the cities. And I think we should at least consider that if there's a bunch of pushback, to continue that line over to 35W.
Well, I think you're gonna get, that initial reaction is always gonna be a little bit of a pushback from, like, MnDOT, where they're looking at
Yeah,
spending
I'm not
money.
saying forget it, I'm just saying.
Right, but I'm just saying, you get, like, Minnesota, the deed, economic development, people like that are gonna also look at it and go, this is a great opportunity. Establishing, the material and really having a task force to figure out, what's the best path to pursue. Because, just making a cold call to MnDOT, you're gonna get no. But, you know, learning from, you know, contracting with Bolton and Mink possibly, to do some things, whatever, but learning, you know, what door to knock on and how to approach this thing, you know, especially from, you know, the federal standpoint, and, you know, how do we get that done, working with our senators or congressmen, to accomplish that. Because those are the people that are gonna see the economic benefits. The other things are not just gonna say, well, we're adding another mile of road that we have to take care of, but they're gonna see, you know, the amount of land that's available here, and it's the only place in the metro area left that is gonna have these large acreage parcels to build on. You know, the other, you know, the rest of the metro area is developed much further than we are, but I don't see any difference, you know, in putting this exchange here as you do down in the Burnsville area, where, you know, you got a huge amount of shopping, everything else happening there. Why? Because it's right along the freeway, and it's right at that split where you're getting, you know, all the traffic coming through. So I mean, I'm sold that this is a great idea. It's just, how do we push that forward? If we just, you know, throw it in a comp plan and wait for feedback, it's gonna be 20 years again, and nothing's gonna happen. So we gotta give it, in my opinion, we gotta give it a really good effort, you know, the next year or so, you know, get the feedback from our elected representatives, both at the state and federal level, say this is something that really is gonna be a game changer for this area.
I think one good arguing point, you could take a look at the development of 610 and what that did.
Yeah, and
With commercial
it's still
business
going
along
on.
there. Yeah, it's still booming. You know, it took a while, and when it was first going in, you're running a road through a cornfield.
Right.
But what it
No,
is today
great
is,
example.
yeah, I think that's a good point to be used for our argument on this one.
Well, and I think, you know, the dollars that this would cost versus what revenue it can generate, you know, I think it's the best potential for sure.
So we looking for some guidelines tonight on what we want to see for a task force? I mean, it seems we all agree here.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, if we're in agreement here, to what would be the next steps? Really just send an invitation to adjoining cities to see if they want to participate in?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what I'm hearing is basically, you know, reach out to the communities that, you know, the 4 communities that are affected, county level, look at, you know, seeing if they're interested in sending 1, possibly 2 members per community, you know, have that initial meeting, you know, and then kind of task it with exploring the idea of 170th or 180th and kind of maybe kind of re-engaging kind of that I-35 West East or task force that was done in the early 2000s to see, hey, does this, you know, still make sense? I know a couple of the communities I talked to had kind of, you know, had expressed, you know, having a conversation about this because it has been kind of, you know, in the background for a while. So I think that would be the next step, is get the letters out and then see, you know, what the
Well, and
response is.
I think like Lino and Hugo for one point would be, clarify that we're not asking them for financial contributions at this point. We're just asking for, you know, cooperation and a representative that would sit on the task force as well.
Yeah, because I think you're kind of, you know, I mean, you're a few steps away at this point from kind of doing, you know, a significant engineering study. I mean, you're still kind of making sure, kind of taking the temperature to see what the support is for this before you kind of get that, before you want to go do a large scale engineering study, feasibility type study. You wouldn't want to invest those funds if you got all of a sudden half the communities are saying, absolutely no, we don't want to do that. So I think this is, the next steps would be we send a letter out, see what the response is, and get something set up.
Could we also get on the docket for Washington County and Anoka County's board to present just a rough idea, just to kind of get the...
Just more to present the idea.
Yeah, just to present an idea, like people come in front of us and say, hey, you know, we want to present this, you know, float this by you, and
I think that's a great
basically
idea.
what, off the cuff, I mean, what are your...
When are the comp plans finalized?
Did we do next, I think, early 19? That'll be finalized.
Can we get our hands on the preliminaries for everybody else and kind of utilize that? you know, as a selling piece, hey, this is how it lines up with your comp plan, your preliminary comp plan anyway. Keeps you ahead of the ball. I doubt they're gonna change much between now and when they are finalized.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think they're all out for feedback right now, so.
And would Washington County, their EDA, the little branch that's reaching out, would they be involved in this? Or could they be involved in
They
this?
could. I mean, I know Chris is real supportive of it, but
And I think, just at the county level, you'd want to make sure that you had support from all the communities that are located within the county. You wouldn't want to go to Washington County if, say, we're in support of 180th and Hugo's in support of 170th, and all of a sudden they're getting conflicting feedback. I mean, I would say you can go to the county level, but the recommendation would be bring back that unified, say, okay, everybody located in Washington County is on board with 180th. Let's take it to the next level, because again, you wouldn't want one meeting Forest Lake goes there, next meeting Hugo's, it goes there, it tells them a completely different story, you want that. So I think that'd be like the next step up, kind of once the task force maybe meets once or twice to kind of settle in on, what we're looking at, or let them know that we're at least exploring both options at this point, and, don't have the recommendation, but we're at least starting that ball moving forward.
I think he's right about that, I really do,
yeah.
because it'd be tough to convince the commissioners to look at that.
Yeah,
one.
then you got
Well,
another
guys are
county,
already
"Oh, we
fighting,
don't want
yeah, yeah, so, that was a good idea, Dan, I think we need to start there, that's just me.
Yeah, this one's a unique one in terms of how multi-jurisdictional it actually is. I mean, you have 4 affected communities in 2 counties, state agencies, federal agencies with I-35. I mean, you basically have just about every single government agency that would have some sort of fingers in the pot on this one is in on this one. So there's a lot of coordination effort that'll be required to get this all the way through.
Just screams quick moving.
Ryan, you deal with this, much more than we do. What's your recommendations?
You
How
can
to
do
get
anything
started.
you want, but you gotta build partners before you get going.
Yeah.
So, until we get some traction there, then we can start, talking the strategic way of approaching all this. Back in November of 17, we did a lot of nice things that outlined a lot of arguments for 180th, some issues with it at 180th, like hurdles you should overcome, and then a bunch of pros and cons, and I think that's just a good starter for all you guys to read if you haven't seen that document yet. Kind of understand the complexity of everything involved and what you would be arguing against and arguing for. I certainly don't ever foresee it ever getting built between 35E and W where it's currently planned in the current transportation plans. At the time that was approved and developed, that regional park wasn't nearly the size it is today. That's been extended, so now you're telling me you're gonna build a major corridor through there. Then the pros, they say, well, it has a connectivity all the way through 4. I'm like, well, what happens east of Highway 61 anyways? What's really gonna happen? I mean, look at all the wetland and the lakes and the lowland out that way anyway. So is development really gonna just occur between 35E and 61? Probably, right? Over time, just like you look down in Hugo, we got that nice main intersection between Centerville and Hugo, and then you drive eastward and you come to 61. What do you gotta do? You gotta go left or right anyway. That's what they're arguing against us, stuff like that. So there are so many examples out there that would be in our favor of what you're saying that can be done, already are being done and work fairly well. MnDOT's, had the concerns about interchange spacing. Well, drive the 494, 694 loop and you tell me where we are talking about spacing. Here you benefit 4 communities that can thrive economically. This is a perfect location for a distribution system or center where you can go southbound on 35W, 35E, or up to Duluth. Where else do you have perfect, stuff like that? And if you don't need to go all the way down in the cities, then maybe you need to go up to the North Dakota market. You just take the 610 now, So you got all those things into play there. How do you just strategically put them all together? Building partners. So we got to do a better job on that. Certainly you would want your own county to buy in. Anoka County, they would probably buy in if they didn't have a lot of other needs. They did put a lot of money in the current project. They also got a lot of money going in the Highway 10 through the Anoka-Ramsey area, but they also know they have significant needs on Highway 65 through the Blaine, Ham Lake area that has 3 times the traffic levels we're talking about here. So that's what we got to mirror, and maybe we don't get something built in 2 years, but let's get the plan developed, and they can certainly provide staff and assistance with all those. to help ease any financial responsibilities of the municipality. So that's where I would, you know, again, build your partners, so.
I had a,
Highway 61's got to be part of that total, I mean, as far as improving 61 in between there, because without that, there still has to be traffic to get to 180th, either way.
Certainly as we see develop, continue to move southward, 61 improvements will follow.
so Mara had brought up,
One and Fenway.
the dedicated bus route, 61 project. Talking to Met Council on this, you know, I think they're renting place, I mean, they have parking right at, the county library here in Forest Lake. And aren't they renting parking lot space from,
Running Aces.
Casino?
Yeah.
Maybe bringing them in on it as having a hub in that area vicinity would be beneficial. And then I thought about maybe thinking of a different name, instead of calling it 180th, maybe throw a project on it. I don't know off the top of my head for an example, but something that kind of encompasses, you know, the 4 cities, 2 counties, you know, something, you know, a north suburb, commuter task force, something of that nature, something,
Quad City.
there you go. Something that might not just make, at least Hugo think that it's gonna be a all or nothing. You know, like you said, if we find a consensus and 170th ends up being the best option, you know, we'll proceed that way, it's better than nothing. But maybe, name the task force something that's a little more unifying and generic.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, would you be able to forward to the council the information that was put together last
Yep,
fall, spring, whenever that was?
November 20th, 2017.
I guess consensus is to start moving forward, coming up with some ideas for building those partnerships, reaching out to communities. Need any more than that, Dan?
Nope, I think that's what we needed, so, thanks.
All right. Let's move on to the gravel road paving policy. You wanna take us into that, or should I start? Or-
Ryan has some stuff on this one.
Okay.
Do you need me to run the presentation for you, or?
There, or do you want to run it?
I can run it, just give me a second to get it pulled up here.
So I handed out a printed PDF to everyone too. Got a couple extra copies of more needed.
Why don't you start right on my computer, apparently. It's welcoming to this lovely western scene, and we're stuck there, so.
All right, I kind of went a little older than just talking about gravel roads, just to provide a little background for everyone tonight. You know, basically first slide in there, you can also scroll along in your online packets until Dan gets up and running. You know, we got about 130 miles of roadway, 101 paved, 29 gravel. Now the 29 gravel's come down a little bit since the double chip seal projects, but just short notice on the presentation, I kind of kept a lot of the stuff the same. You know, it doesn't really change the numbers greatly of where we're at, but so defining the need, there was a lot of concerns about the conditions of the local roads, which then we basically appointed a street task force committee that consisted of 5 members with backgrounds of the city engineer, administrator, finance director, public works director, and mayor. And then we were to basically review our current inventory and come up with some plans on financing those improvements. So, which then led us into the timeline of events. The 2011 Street Task Force Committee was created, and then, you know, upon that, that's when we basically adopted the franchise fees. And the policy went live in July of 13, and which then led into the first 2014 project funded by franchise fees for local street improvements. And basically kind of started out more as just local mill and overlays and maintenance types of projects. And then in 15, through the budget discussions and capital improvements, that's when we started including more conversations related to gravel roads, and then had a pretty big presentation in 17 on gravel roads. and then here we are today. So just some inventory. Here's an existing map, just so we can see it on a PowerPoint. We broke the section into quadrants, so you're looking at the northwest quadrant here. Roads highlighted green are your gravel roads. Northeast quadrant. And then your southwest quadrant, now in this location here, some of the roads have had that double chip seal done to them. You know, we did a test run on Forest Road just to see how that would hold up because that was a high volume road. And then now portions of 190th and down to the southeast quadrant have been double chip sealed and that'd be performing very well. Southeast area is still, you know, very rural. You kind of got a lot of farming going down in there, and then the conservation area. So, just gravel road issues, what Public Works deals with on a day-to-day basis. Loose surface aggregates, potholing, frost boils through the freeze-thaw cycles, washboarding when cars are stopping, or stuff from heavy equipment driving down them. Snowplow damage, you know, we get a lot of that too, and then dust is the thing we always hear, so. Current assessment policy for rural, you know, basically if you take a road from gravel to pavement, the current assessment policy, and to my knowledge, has always been they assess 100% of those project costs. So those are typically petition-led because the city doesn't want to order the project in the fear you're going to get an appeal on assessments. And, you know, that's also outlined in the assessment policy that's the percentage you guys need before a petition project can move forward. And it takes four-fifths vote to advance that project if petition-led as well. Urban, basically those are roads that typically require the full section and curb and gutter. Fifth Avenue Southwest, or Southwest is a perfect example of what a gravel urban road would be, or 9th Avenue Southwest. Current practice, what we've been doing with the current funds is, you know, through the road projects, Public Works has placed crush millings from the local projects out on the gravel roads, and, you know, right away when they're done, they look great, and, you know, the dust is pretty minimized, but they do get pretty hard, and over time, you can't grade them anymore, and next slide, and that's when you get portions where Public Works was, in the past, using hot mix to smooth out those, what was a gravel road. So that's where then we previously talked about the alternative maintenance that could be done, the double chip seal, you know, out in the rural areas, low traffic. We basically come in, do any minor repairs that are necessary, and then reshape and grade the road after a full depth reclamation, kind of regrinds the material up in place. You know, over time by adding the millings to it, you've increased the thickness of the gravel base, which is, helps provide a sturdy road base, instead of doing a full excavated recon and then triggering watershed rules. Next slide. Here's just some more background about that double chip seal stuff that was previously presented. Handed the PowerPoint so you guys could read out through all that stuff later. And then next slide, just kind of if we got damage to any of that stuff, this is basically as easy as how you can repair it with this stuff out of the back of a truck. Then here was some pictures on the next slide that showed 5-year-old double chip seal projects out in rural Wisconsin, and these slides actually here. And then we got doing some double chip seal projects on some of those rural roads. You know, in the PowerPoint previously, we estimated it would be anywhere from $15 to $17. Our actual cost for the two projects that we've done in 17 and 18, total project costs come out to $14 a foot. So significantly less than your traditional shape and pay project, and we'll talk about those costs here later in the slides. If we had to add any class 5, which we haven't, because over time, like we've talked about, Public Works has been taking those millings and putting on those real gravel roads and beefing up those road sections. So we haven't had to get into any subgrade correction in any of those projects. You know, pretty traditional gravel roads, and you know they've seen a lot of traffic, and then just adding the millings has added a lot of strength to them. So. The savings that we have seen, you know, obviously from that is routine grading, the addition of gravel or dust control measures. You know, I'll talk about calcium chloride too. So, Now, just kind of looking at the big picture and throwing all the gravel roads on one page, you know, we've talked about how could we tackle something, priority-wise. You know, so just looking at it overall, the ones highlighted in green are your potential phase one areas where you got a lot of density on them already, or you're not gonna see any new development, right? And, there's, you know, some areas that you got a purple where you for sure would probably need a full section just because of the use that it's surrounded with, versus just shape and pave. And then a phase two, you know, which is obviously in the outer rural areas and might not even be a candidate for a traditional bituminous road and be better served off, especially east of 61, is your double chip sealed roads. And then the red areas, you know, obviously those are in high development areas and we're entertaining applications all around that, so it just doesn't really make sense to do a shape and pave on those projects when we have the developers come in and build alignments of the road that fits the application's best use, and we get the full road section. So this was then, you know, moving out of these scenarios where a lot of just cost estimates were developed. But next slide, you know, we always hear about and talk about sometimes calcium chloride. Why doesn't the city of Forest Lake do it? Hugo does 2 applications. Scandia now does 2 diluted applications a year. Other townships around us require the residents to pay for it, or, you know, stuff like that. But basically, we got the 130 miles or 30 miles, and then, or you can see the total distance here, but if we were to annually do a calcium chloride project on all the gravel roads, it's about $131,000 a year to do one shot. And your performance might vary year to year, just depending on how wet or dry the existing ground is at the time of the application and what prep work you do put into it prior to placing the calcium chloride. And the one thing that's, yeah, it does great for dust, but it does eat up the bottom of cars, and even in some of these rural or urban area or rural areas that don't like the dust, but they don't want the calcium chloride because they have a nice car and they don't want to, you know, so I hear it from both ways too, so. So kind of jumping into some cost estimates, basically taking the phase one roads and doing a traditional cost estimate, what we typically see, you know, rule of thumb on a shape and pave on a rural road, 24-foot top, blacktop, 2 lifts, minimal ditch work, you know, you're looking at total project costs about $100 a foot. In Rice Creek, your permitting, you know, would obviously be much lesser, which that'd be more difficult in Comfort Lake, but we do got some costs built in there for storm stuff, but not building BMPs to any degree. So a full section, I'll stay on this slide for one more second. If you see the total cost, if you came in today and did all your phase one roads, shape and pave, you know, that does, you know, count for some culvert replacements, some ditching work, and adding some aggregate base to put a better crown in it and some material that you can work with, you're just under $4 million. Next slide was phase one. If you had to come in and do that full section of the industrial area we talked about, which would be a full section, our typical commercial section would apply here, where we're at least 20 inches of sand, 10 inches class 5, and 4 inches of bits. Running the East Hills area, your bit would probably be a little thicker than the 4 inches, because that is our residential road standard in new development. But there, you're about $202 a foot. Next slide, your shape and paves in the phase two, still at $100 a foot, roughly as it works out, but just coming and paving the phase twos, shape and pave would be about just under 8 million. So next slide, just running some gravel road scenarios at you. You got all the roads categorized there. Your total cost at the top. Now, breaking it down in the middle of the slide here, you got phase one shape and pave, phase one full section, phase two only. Well, if you ran over that right away, you see what the upfront cost would for all of it would be. But if you ran it over, you know, 10-year event and got to the end of what you wanted to accomplish, you can see what you would have to spend annually. Or if you did it in a 15-year cycle or in a 20-year cycle. So that kind of just breaks down the cost there. Now, if you take all your Shape in One, Phase One projects, you know, you got the 3.8 million, and again, if you broke that over a 10, 15, 20 year, but then you lowered the participation rates, you could see what the city would have to pay versus the property owner if you did a 75% assessment rate versus the 100%. Again, then if you did a 50% assessment rate, you would see the costs, what they would be over those same 10, 15, and 20-year cycles.
All right. Thank you, Ryan.
Still got a lot more to go. I want to see it all.
I was hoping that.
But I did, you know, I can go through it fast too. These are real, taking real properties. This is obviously one of those roadways that has popped up all the time. Ran 2 scenarios on this just because you got so much construction traffic to the north with all the housing that's going on in Wyoming. So do you do a shape and pave? Well, you know it's gonna get beat up with the construction, so now do you have to do more of a full section to, you know, address that wear and tear, or do you wait and keep it gravel and do a shape and pave when more build out has occurred to the north? So, but again, taking the properties and then going through, you can see how this would just be outrageous assessments because the few number of parcels along here. And, you know, kind of another rule of thumb is if you're looking to do a residential road improvement and you're getting well over $10,000 per lot or unit, you probably should start getting a little more unique on how you're trying to finance that project to avoid any appeals, unless you had upfront consensus of those property owners to sign off on that at the beginning. Here, next one, case scenario. This one's a lot more density, a lot better assessments as you see across the board doing a shape and pave. We obviously have a live application in here as well that would offset some of that lineal foot, but maybe that's a priority. Next one, we've gone. This is one that actually, it stopped exactly on the lot line just to the east here because the people at the end of the cul-de-sac never wanted to pay for the assessments back in 2001. This project was completed. That was when bituminous was $29 a ton, and the estimates, I think they're in the 60s. So, you know, hindsight, wish they would have did it, especially how it aligns with your assessment policy today. Another one, case study, we actually went through this in reality. The argument was, well, how many lots do you account for people if you're going to run the assessment policy? Plus, when we went down to the cul-de-sac to the west, the city didn't have information on some of these properties that were considered unbuildable. That information was supplied by the county, so then you drop off another property, and then at the end, you had higher assessments, and the project never moved forward because it got it pretty high. Then another slide, it's in your packet too, just a bunch of gravel road examples, breaking out, just taking a fictitious half mile with adjoining lots on each side, same foot lots, so higher density, you're more of your kind of an urban section. If you could relate that to some of your other roadways in the city that have the high density, or then in the example too was just taking, you know, from lots on one side and much larger lots on another, just to see how the lots would dilute and see how the assessments would play out. So just gives you an example of how far some of the money could go as allocated. Last one was the Southwest that we've talked about. You know, we've talked about this for a number of years now. We've had estimates and, you know, typical layout done here and what it would take. And going to the next slide, you can see what the assessments would be on a number of scenarios, whether it was done by the unit method, which obviously would be favorable to one of the property owners, or do you go towards the front footage method, which you've defined 3 methods in your assessment policy you could, you know, elect to follow on a project like this. 15th Street, we did the front footage because of commercial industrial property. Typically in a residential, though, we've always stayed with the unit, but in here, you probably would stay with the front footage because of the land use. So last slide, just some questions and then questions, I guess. So that's kind of wanted to give you guys a history baseline of how some costs play out, and if you agree with setting priorities or if, you know, stuff like that. So it's kind of on the table now.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I guess, you know, I think the city's, you know, Ryan and Dave, but you guys do a good job with what we have. prioritizing what needs to be done, reclaiming the millings, the double chip seal, it's all working good. I guess I'm looking more at the fact that in our budget, we've committed, is it 240,000?
There's 200 that went in last year out of the surplus, and then the budget that's on the table right now envisions 200,000 additional going into
Additional.
19.
So basically, we got, $400,000 building up, and I think the council needs to set some guidelines on, where and how much of that money gets, spent on turning gravel roads into asphalt. And that's where I think the council needs to have some input. I'd like to see, residents have at least a minimum amount that they have to pay. I mean, in the higher density areas, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 is, maximum they're gonna do. But, when you get to these rural areas where, the roads are probably needed and the roads would probably help spur some other development. But, there's wetlands, there's other things, there's, some people that have a lot of frontage where we're never gonna get a 100% agreement on it. We only have so much money in there. I don't wanna see, it all wasted on one road because, yeah, they're the first ones to apply and we gave it to them. I'd like us to set some basic guidelines for city staff and, future guidance for the council as to what our intentions are for putting that money there and how we'd like to see that, doled out into there. And, is it, 50% city and, 25% for each homeowner? Is it 33% each, 75% city, some basic guidelines? Or is it, each property owner has to meet a certain level before a city contributes money into it? Is it 2,000, 5,000, 10,000? But there are projects that should be done, and we're never gonna get any of these roads done if we're going to look at the property owners themselves to put 90% or 100% of the money into it. And we do get complaints. The Liberty Ponds developments up in Wyoming, it's impacting us. And, they've got asphalt roads up there, but unfortunately, it doesn't reach out to us. So now it's our responsibility to, take care of the residents that are living here that are, breathing that dust all the time. It's, it's affecting their quality of life out there. And that doesn't mean the city has to take 100% responsibility for that, but if we have, a good incentive out there, I think, some of these projects are gonna come in looking for that. I think some of these projects that, Ryan or Dave might identify as really needing something done, it gives us a tool with that $400,000 and/or more if that fund builds up in the future to do. But I just want to set some reasonable guidelines and expectations to how that money actually gets spent on roads. That was enough for me, Tom.
Yeah, the nice thing about it, there is some payback on this, no matter what we do. And so I think Ryan is right. I think they have to be prioritized and I don't know, as far as the amount that each pays, maybe it's a flat rate, I don't know. But something certainly needs to be done and it'll never happen. We need to get going on it somehow with limited funds.
For sure.
We're thinking a percentage up to a cap of, we hit those rural, some of them rural roads, and you can get expensive quick, so do you just want to put a cap on, 5,000 or a percentage of the property value in order to?
I guess it's still up to us to determine which roads really need to be done. And so obviously a lot of those real isolated rural roads that might still, and 10 years from now, it might still be 100% on property owners to do it. There's dead-end cul-de-sacs that have one or two houses on them, and that might be all they have. So I'm looking more at, especially to the south side of the city here, there's roads that are dirt roads right now that are really getting a lot of traffic on. It is costing us money to maintain them every year. they're not all going to be able to, we don't have enough millings to cover all these roads. We won't in the next 15 or 20 years probably have enough millings to cover all these roads. So there are some, and that's, I think, why we created that fund and put the money in there. And it wasn't just a placeholder to spend the money on something else later. I mean, I want to see that committed to this. And, you know, that fund won't, you know, it'll continue to grow some. I mean, the council will have to cap it sooner or later, but it'd be nice to have that money as leverage, as a tool, as we do our other asphalt roads, and our road projects. We can, you know, include these in it, get a, you know, better buy. These won't be individual projects, but I think we can include them into the project as they go along. But, like, you know, how much are we gonna commit, you know, of that fund? You know, we're not making a commitment to, you know, the 10 or 15 million dollars for the whole thing. We're just saying if we have money available, and if that's $200,000 a year, that's how much we're putting into it. You know, right now it's $400,000 available. How do we spend that? Are we gonna say you know, city will spend half, if the homeowners will do the other half? It's still up to the council to ultimately approve which project, but I think we need to have a lot more definitive guidelines for city staff to communicate to those landowners as to what we're willing to do. Sorry.
I think development's gonna help us out there too.
What was that, Sam?
I think development will come along, it's gonna help us out there too, in some of those places. And, 'cause some would have to be taken care of there too.
Yeah, development will help. I mean, there's areas that, you know, Ryan's saying we shouldn't pave because development will take care of that itself, but,
Yeah.
And currently, we're at 100% assessment.
100% assessment. And when you have, you know, 4 or 5 people living on a road that is highly traveled.
Ryan, do you have any kind of suggestion you'd like to see? You think it would, a good blend that would work well? Maybe some steps in a program, yeah.
One thing I wish I could change is we had more time between the last assessment project and where we're at today, because I'm afraid we're gonna bring up that group that was assessed for several years in a row, and, you know, the city hurried up and did a bunch of shape and pay projects to beat watershed rules too. And then that's where some of them fell off that have been talked about forever. But, you know, if I look at a map, I'm certainly targeting, you know, one of the case studies I did was Enfield Court. Dead end cul-de-sac. You got paved roads for I don't know how long, and you drive into that cul-de-sac, then all of a sudden turns gravel. You know, that was 100% assessed. You're looking at $10,000. Would they all buy in for 50%? You know, I don't know. But then if you're gonna assess only 50%, you're gonna hear about it. And you just gotta be willing to stand where you believe what is right and what you're trying to accomplish. Certainly would look at the areas that are developed already, therefore we minimize construction traffic coming in and out of all that, and basically the only thing, our biggest thing to worry about is garbage trucks, right? And you got a number of those pockets through the community, 224th, all over the place, you know, especially around the lake. That cul-de-sac I just talked about, the case study that's real project that almost went through a year or two ago and didn't because how the assessments got, you know, you had so much work already done, but because what the actual assessment was, they died off, but you had the density. Now, you know, that's where you get out. I know we would all would love to have the Harrow Road paved, or Heath Avenue paved up to Wyoming. You're gonna have to have a way different assessment policy there compared to the others, because even when I was proposing to do a shape and pave and assessing 50%, if there were 5 found accessible properties, that was still almost $17,000 a property. So, you know, obviously that road gets a lot of traffic. And we've, you know, been successful and gotten the speed limit reduced there, which they're favorable of, but yeah, it's pretty bad on a dry day. So I would focus, if you're truly gonna tackle gravel roads where the development's already done. So the shape and pave's gonna last a long time and not get beat up by heavy vehicle use.
You know, along the lines of where they're developed, another unit of measure we could look at is, are they throughways or dead ends? You know, do they kind of go nowhere? I'd be fine kicking in extra funds on the city's half for, you know, things that are through streets, like you talked about, Heath. You know, things where you're not getting just the neighborhood traffic through there. You know, at that point, I could see a higher percentage contributed from the city's aspect. Use that as a rule of thumb to move forward.
Ed?
The way I see it, I mean, we're stuck with two problems. Number one, how to prioritize which roads will get done, and then how to pay for it. The first thing, and somebody mentioned traffic count, is it feasible that you could come up with some kind of traffic counts on the ones that we think are on the high priority? So, you know, so you'd have some kind of formula as to traffic count, so you justify, say, I want to pave this road based on the number of vehicles going through there.
We could put
It
two
wouldn't,
counters
it
down.
wouldn't solve the, how we're going to pay for it yet, but it might be a better way of prioritizing which one should come first.
Well, I don't know, I think between Ryan and Dave, you could probably come up with a list of, 5 or 10 roads we feel priority. We could reach out to property owners along them with, a base proposal at this point. I mean, we only have $400,000. I mean, we're not gonna do 20 miles of road. So we have to look at what we have, can we make that 400 into 800,000 and get some roads done?
From a legal standpoint, you would have to address your assessment policy, I suppose, especially if you're gonna face an appeal situation.
Mayor, members of the council, that's correct, and I think Ryan alluded to it briefly in his initial presentation. Of course, the challenge is what type of potential challenges might you face? And at the end of the day, your policy and what you can and cannot assess for is based off of the special benefit test. So the question is, do you meet that test? Which is essentially, does the value of your property increase at least as much as the amount that you were assessed? And if the answer is no, then you fail that test and you've got a problem. If the answer is yes, then whether you have people who don't want to pay it or not, at least from a legal standpoint, you're solid. But that's part of that, that's all linked together with looking at your assessment policy. And of course, the higher percentage, the more risk. If you have 100% or 80% or 75%, and then it's a high dollar figure, there's that piece. There's also opportunities to defer some of those special assessments based on particular situations. Again, those are outlined really in statute, but people will come in with hardships, or it's a lot of money, or I can't pay it. And that's not a valid deferral basis. Is it undeveloped property? Is it Green Acres property? Is there a situation, disabled situation? Otherwise, there are only a small category of situations where the city can legally defer those assessments too, which is also a piece of the puzzle.
Typically, our assessment rate has been a 10-year, paid over 10 years of, through your taxes. Sometimes we've gone as far as 15, but traditionally 10. And the interest rates, I can't remember what we did on 15th Street, but that would be some recent numbers to look at on that aspect. But, or if you're scared about something, but you think you're making something favorable to the adjacent property owners, if they did sign off on an assessment of waivers, you could basically skirt around the 429 process, but you want to make sure that typically when you do that, you're going to agree to a number that's not going to exceed, so that way you can have it in that agreement, and then the city takes the additional risk if bids came in high. But not often do you have a moving number when somebody's waiving their right to an assessment, because their whole point was they knew they could afford what number you agreed upon, and I'm okay with that, don't go any higher, right?
Not a penny more.
I think there's an ability to break free some low-hanging fruit. It seems like there's some projects out there that just a little bit of incremental city investment is going to spur some property owners wanting to contribute that will, I guess, I'm struggling between, I feel like if we just get started and however we do that, that there's, it's going to take some properties, much deeper investment and much more time on the city's part to be able to come to an agreement versus, I feel like there's other projects that are out there that are just almost on the tipping point. If we can just identify those and get started with those, it's minimal investment on our part. We're getting more of our, sections of roads paved. And it seems like you just need to set that policy to be just that tipping point. I feel like that's a better spot to start than to try to come up with the 10-year plan on paving all of the roads. I feel like that's going to take a long
No,
time and.
one step at a time, I agree. I think it'd be nice to identify 5 to 10 potential projects while we're modifying our policies at the same time, to be able to engage those who are affected.
Right.
Get their feedback as well and be able to move forward. We've got $400,000 to work with. We don't have millions, but it'd be nice to make sure that, we're taking that step. And, the double chip seal is still something we're gonna be doing and the millings. But how many, per year project, do we get to do a mile of road with millings or more, or?
It's more than a mile we've done, and I wrote that already in the year in review, but I didn't write it on my thing.
So a mile to 2 basically, or something like that, or?
Oh,
We did quite a ways this year.
Yeah.
Everton up to 240th, all the way down 240th and back down Elmcrest, that whole entire loop by the gun club, all got millings, just from the Northwest project,
All right.
for a few miles.
Kind of thinking out of the box, if we identify, say, 5 or 10 roads that need to be improved, kind of like the downtown thing where you offer an incentive, an X number of dollars, if people buy in.
Right. And you're spurring investment, right? Or
Exactly.
you're incentivizing
Right.
some private
But it
investment.
wouldn't be a permanent, going forward, it doesn't last forever.
Yeah, we have the money in the fund now,
Right.
and
Wouldn't we still need to amend our policy in order to do that, or would this be
I think so.
supplemental program outside the policy?
No, Mayor, members of the council, you need to amend your policy. You can always change it again in the future, but you need to be consistent with your policy when you're doing these, unless it's a petition for a project.
So, thinking backwards to a policy, does staff feel like you could take 5 to 10 projects of, and then back into, here's the policy change that it would take to spur on our top, maybe just say our top 5 projects?
I think that's what you have to do. I think you have to pick your priorities of your roads first. Try to figure out what that cost is, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and then what the policy is to make that happen. What you don't want to do is have a policy today for special assessing at 50% and then go to 75% next year for your own good.
Right.
You don't want to do that. So you want us to look at, I'm sure we know what roads are probably more priorities than others depending on what they do. And let's figure out how to get there. And then we'll make a recommendation on the roads and some kind of a policy that will get you there. I
And
think that's
also-
the best approach.
And also some public output or some public input on, here are our, top 5. And if you're not on the top 5 and think you should be, then please come forward and let's have that conversation.
Right, because, and $400,000 a year is not going to get you very far.
I
So,
think we recognize
that's why
that
it's
needs to go
important
north.
to
Right.
prioritize and leverage that in however different way we can figure out. And we'll have to look at a few options and what kind of leverage that'll buy.
Does their milling and double chip seal come out of that 400,000 also? Or is that a separate fund?
You have 225,000 budgeted annually for pavement maintenance, which is the double chip seal, crack filling, or seal coating. So this year, we elected to go forward with the double chip seal project, but our bids were so good, then we had some money left over, so that's why we hurry up and did a quick quote job for the crack filling. Next year, we don't plan on doing a double chip seal project, but the local street project will continue to go put millings out on some of those rural gravel roads. But we are gonna do a seal coat project. So kind of between Dave and I is how we've laid that out and the plan and in priorities, and it's changed, you know, what needs to be addressed now or what can wait. Or what we need more supply of, we need more millings now because we did such a large double chip seal project. So we covered up our millings now.
Do we have an earmarked dollar amount? I know you broke down what we're putting down for, is that lane foot or linear foot?
That was per gravel road project foot, whatever the widths have been, they've varied obviously.
Okay. So, I mean, if we're gonna have 50 tons of millings on our next project per se, do you know about what that's gonna be running you, as far as how far that stretches? So out of that fund we're putting 2 1/4 into every year, do you have earmarked how much of that we could be using? Just,
Not yet, because we haven't finalized the budgets or the scope of work in the local road improvement. But, you know, we've asked that the franchise fees collects closer to what it actually collects. So we now have been working with $700,000 and asked to get up to 730, still leaves you a buffer with some excess funds if you had to do something over time. And then a request of $200,000 from funds that have been sitting there to go into there. But then we also have added 25,000 from sewer, water, and storm, because all utility work we've been doing, part of the local project. But we got some needs out in the northeast part of the city, and you're gonna get a lot more lineal foot versus utilities now, because we've been spending so much money on storm sewer work in the northwest quadrant, because it's shot and, you know, crushed and everything. So we'll go farther on our lineal foot once the final number is known, and work accordingly with the gravel roads in that area to just reduce hauling routes. So hard to kind of know how far you're gonna go until you figure out all that, but.
Well, and if, I guess, another thing to look at would be is a road like Harrow, that's dirt right now, gravel. If that's paved, I think you open up a lot of acreage to that, you know, are not gonna come there because the cost of building and paving that road isn't gonna come there. So there's those benefits of, you know, kind of helping to spur some growth in the community. Obviously, it'd be housing, it wouldn't be commercial in that area, but you know, that's where we need to kind of set the priorities, come up with the policies for it. I think, you know, like Ryan, you were talking that cul-de-sac, to me, that's more of a, you know, really good choice for millings and putting that down there versus, you know, where are we gonna lay down, you know, new asphalt anyway.
going back to our assessment policy, do you wanna go to a tiered one based upon, say, phase 1% inclusion, phase 2% inclusion, and phase 3% inclusion? I mean,
I personally would just, you know, like to open up the flexibility of, you know, the city is, instead of 100%, you know, if funds are available or if council decides to participate up to X percentage, or that, you know, there's a minimum threshold per property owner, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, you know, but the city's participation would begin after that or somewhere, because I do think, you know, every property owner has to have, you know, a fair amount into this to, you know, make it work, but there are a lot of roads that aren't gonna get paved that need to, and that's where we have to step in, and I don't wanna see the hundreds of thousands that we're putting into this squandered away or, you know, stacked up and then used for a whole different purpose down the line someplace. I think we made a commitment to trying to do something for the former township, and, you know, getting roads paved, I think is beneficial to everybody. And it's just a matter of, you know, how do we get the mechanics of working that out and getting something reasonable where, you know, staff can explain that out. We can identify some roads to start with. Once we see if that policy is working, those roads are, you know, it's a great foundation to work forward from there. But yeah, how do we go from what we have now to actually having something that can work with the monies that we have available?
The priorities are really important in this particular whole thing, because when we look at those priorities and we're doing roads, we gotta be thinking about what could possibly be going underneath those roads, any kind of utilities, sewer and water. And we gotta know that before we spend money on paving. And that's why it's so important to really get into this priority thing. And I think, Dave and Ryan are really the ones that need to be doing that for us. And doesn't take very much to eat up 400,000. If they come up with a couple of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 priorities, and we could look at those and what the possibilities are for utilities or whatever else that goes with it, and go from there.
Well, most of the rural roads aren't gonna have too much for infrastructure
No.
underneath them, but like you say, in the
Well,
north,
but it might
the
be some,
northwest corner.
it may be something that is gonna be needed in the future, though, so.
Yeah. The 400,000 today, 5 years from now, could be costing 800,000 or more.
That's right.
I mean, it's climbing fast, and it ain't gonna slow down. The quicker we can try to do something and get it rolling, I mean, if the program works out, maybe in the future, we're committing twice as much to it to make that progress, so.
So the horses, needs Carta's contribution?
Absolutely, it's gotta be prioritized. And
Yep. Bridget, what would you suggest for amending the policy? I mean, is it just a couple of simple sentences, or do we have to rework the whole thing, or?
So, Mayor, members of the council, I actually haven't seen the existing special assessment policy, so I don't have a copy of it in front of me, and I would be happy to take a look at it and get back to you with the answer to that question.
Okay. So we should maybe wait till the next workshop to get back with some recommendations there.
Yes.
And
If you-
maybe between Ryan and Dave, you can come up with maybe the top 4 or 5 roads you think that would benefit the most from new asphalt, not, I would still like to continue the millings on the policy we're doing now anyway, and identify, so there's roads where those will benefit better from, there's roads where new asphalt will benefit, so I'd like to, maybe we can combine those two at next workshop and see if we can push that forward. Blaine, you were gonna say?
I was curious if Bridget could bring a couple options of recommendations for us, as far as changes you'd see beneficial on that policy to give us that flexibility we're talking about.
I can absolutely, Mayor, members of the council, look into that and provide some suggestions and policy alternatives for council consideration.
Thank you.
All right.
Just thinking out loud here, just to prioritize, with Ryan and I, we do the road projects, annual road projects, and so you're going out into the northeast section of town, right, and you have all these gravel pockets that are in that area that we're gonna be doing the local mill and overlay for the year. I mean, is it an option or a thought that you say, okay, well, we have 224th or Jensen or Kessler, one of those things. At that point in time, we're doing a local mill and overlay project in that area. We'll drop our assessment policy to 50/50 since we're doing our road project there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it'd be nice to get, even some, where that 2-block stretch is, that you have to send the grader out, drive and
But you
for
already
an hour
have
to
your,
get
you already
to
have
there.
your contractor out there doing the dirt work, doing the paving. You'll keep it, instead of saying, okay, well, the group at Elmcrest Court wants their road paved while they're on the other side of the city to mobilize, and, you're cutting down on mobilization, you're cutting down a lot of work if you can, it'll add work to, once you finalize your road project, then you'll be able to see, okay, we have these sections of gravel roads in here, why don't we reach out to those communities or those residents and say, we're in this neighborhood, because we're in this area, we're gonna reduce our assessment policy to whatever, 50/50, 75/25 for this time, this year when we're coming through, so.
Yeah.
You have your decision to make. If you wanna forego it, that's fine, then if we're not around, that's 100%.
That's the type of flexibility I was hoping we could find.
Right, exactly. I agree. And, as I stated a little earlier, I still think there's a lot of places where the millings are by far the most beneficial, but yeah, what you just pointed out with, as we're doing those road projects and they have the little pockets here or there, it's a perfect time to offer that type of incentive. But yet, keep in mind, there are, a couple of main roads too that, asphalt is gonna be the way to go. And, the road going up, is it 235th or whatever, to Liberty Ponds? You know, Harrow is one, a couple over by Tanner's Brook. You know, that type of stuff too that, you know, we should be able to look at.
And I think a lot of those major thoroughfares too could benefit from at least a round of millings too to increase that subgrade, so you're not spending that money, you know, then you can do a shape and pay versus, okay, like
Yeah,
Terrence pointed
that-
earlier, that you're gonna have to bring in class 5 and do a lot of corrections if you have 6 inches of millings on it from, you know, 2 years ago on a project. It's gonna be, you're not gonna have to put that money into that subgrade on it.
Well, and I don't know if there's any way we can purchase additional millings, if they're available, but,
Hopefully phase 2 of next year's project will have some additional, because we know right where they should go.
not like 35, we couldn't get any millings off of that at all, right?
Not the first part, so we're,
There's still potential for,
they know where we want them, and if you need a place to place them, and we've talked about if there's a reduced cost, you know, they know the options on the table, but they needed to utilize them as part of their construction, and they got paid premium for it, so.
The question I had is if you do what Dave suggested, does there still have to be a certain number of residents to agree before you can go ahead with it, or?
So we actually did this, and I can't remember what year it was, because it was 3 houses, right? They were gravel, our project was coming right there, and we took the unit prices, made a cost estimate, this is what it's gonna be. Do you guys agree to this? Yes, they signed a waiver of appeals, so.
So what
boom,
happens
we
if you
did.
have one that doesn't, or
Then-
two that don't?
Then that was the discussion, you're all in or you're not getting it. And it was cheap, it was like $2,900 or $3,200.
it was off of Imperial, wasn't it? Or,
Oh, it was south, on the south side of the lake. Up
Okay.
Bay Drive takes you somewhere. I can't remember the exact road.
because we had the same problem right by the gravel pit, where the first half of the road wasn't, or the lower half was paved.
That was
The
part
upper-
of one of your last assessment, true assessment projects.
Yeah.
That was a good meeting.
But that's where you said Bridget mentioned you go down to the feasibility. If you increase your property value within what you're assessing them, you can go ahead, is that correct?
That's the special benefit piece, yep. So any of the 429, if you're going to specially assess the project, you have to follow all of the processes outlined in 429, and you have to adhere strictly to the statutory requirements. You order the feasibility report, all of those pieces. And at the end of the day, the question of whether or not the special assessment is valid, regardless of what your policy is, whether it's 100% or 50% or 20%, is just that special benefit test piece. So provided the special benefit test is met, and you adhere with all the statutory requirements, including uniformity on the same class of property and things along those lines, then the city's assessment is valid. But if not, then it could be found invalid by a court. So it's important to obviously comply with all of the requirements for the special assessment process. And as Ryan mentioned, the alternative is if you get everyone to sign the special assessment waivers, then you're golden. And again, you pick a number and you have to use your best estimate because it's a not to exceed number. So again, if it comes out on the other end where the city's gonna have to pay something because things change with the project, you don't have any ability with the special assessment waiver unless you modify that waiver to capture those additional costs as part of it.
That'd be the ideal route too, because you just take out so many steps, part of that project out the door. Otherwise, if you do follow the 429 process, you need to order the report, you need to present the report, you need to approve the report, you need to have a public hearing, then you have to have order the assessment hearing, then you have to have an assessment hearing. So those are other things that take in consideration when you are doing a 429 process. Because you have to hit all those by state statute, you gotta advertise the right number of days in the paper and all that to be in compliance. But on the other hand, if they sign and waive all those rights, and you can come to an agreement, everyone saves money and time.
You know what you're all thinking? Let's just charge them $280 a year for 10 years, right?
I've heard of that. Seems to me I heard of that, something like that.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. But Ryan, 15th was a phenomenal project. You guys did a great job on that. I mean, I think pretty much every property owner over there was thrilled with how that came out.
You gotta remember that project too also went through the old assessment policy in 2009, and it failed. It got to after the report and failed because nobody wanted to pay the assessment rates. So an easy tool in advocating for that project was we showed all the property owners their proposed assessments back in '09 versus what they actually would be with the new policy, and they're like, where do I sign?
Yep, yeah, but that was asphalt to asphalt again, now we're dealing with
Yep.
bringing it to asphalt, so. Staff's got enough to go with, start with. Bridget, you'll come back with some recommendations, and we'll have some roads to identify with those, and, we can engage, the property owners at that point and measure how that works. All right, let's move on.
Jamie's been patient.
Yes, thank you for.
Yeah, no problem. So Mayor and members of the City Council, I'm here for a quick update on where we are with the Lakeside Memorial Park themed concepts playground project. So I'll just kind of go over a quick overview. September 24th meeting, the City Council approved the purchase of our main structure that we proposed, which was the NRPA 5 to 12 trade show piece, and provided direction to meet with themed concepts for any additional modifications or tweaks to the original, to the additional components of the project. So since then, myself, along with one member of the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission, did meet with themed concepts to go over a variety of considerations to modify the original concept plan you saw on September 24th. From there, we were focusing on some of the comments and feedback provided by City Council, maybe just putting a little more of our investment into equipment and providing something of a personal touch. So included in the packet tonight, I just provided option A, which was what you were presented with September 24th, and the cost analysis for that, and then compared to option B, which is our new concept plan based on those modifications that were discussed with themed concepts, and then the price structure for that. That's outlined just here in your packet. You can just briefly see kind of what you would be looking at from a total project cost. I outlined a subtotal for what the costs are, and then we did pay for the one piece already, the $39,999, so that is deducted. We do have a regular Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission meeting tomorrow evening, so this is just kind of to give you an idea of where I'm going with this, and we'll be discussing with them tomorrow. This is to kind of foreshadow what you'd hopefully be seeing coming back to you in the near future, pending on how Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission, how the meeting goes tomorrow evening and what may be decided there. I think option B is, a very solid recommendation, and that gives you an idea of what could be coming from an investment standpoint for this project. Lastly, just as noted, one of the questions from the September 24th meeting was the cost for surfacing. I am still evaluating that with a few different suppliers and looking to get a reduced cost on that with some modifications. And so again, from the September 24th meeting, it was just maybe we can reduce our cost in the surfacing portion of it and put a little bit more cost into the playground piece itself. So I think this outlines here tonight that we would really still be accomplishing that with what we've provided. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Can you highlight the main changes you made from Plan A to Plan B, please?
Sure. I highlighted a couple. It's kind of hard to see on this, but we didn't want to have a significant impact in the budget. So we weren't able to do any major significant modifications. So what we talked about, we looked at. Oh, I don't know how to do that. Sorry, you got to put the thing in there.
No, you're on.
Yeah, it looks like we went up like $25,000.
Oh, I don't know how to get off of it.
I'm trying to get it all on one page.
In your packet, I did highlight, I can kind of go over some of the modifications. So one of the things we added was, let me just pull this up here quick. So for personalization, they have graphic panels that we thought would be neat to add. They can do educational panels or scavenger hunt panels, so they hide different little, you can do critters or different fish that are in Forest Lake, or we talked about different emblems that may be, the different branches of service to tie in the military theme. So we added the graphic educational panel, scavenger hunt. Another component that was added were the talk tubes. Those, they said, were pretty popular, especially to be ADA compliant and accessible. Just a fun thing to add that doesn't take up a significant imprint or space. So it's a good way to maximize the use of the space there. And then additionally, they took out like the dinghy boat and like the tic-tac-toe panel. So they were able to add some log climbers and kind of make it more of a connective challenge. I don't want to say challenge course, but a little more connectivity between the 2 to 5 structure with some log steppers. Then you can do the monkey bars, and then there's the rope climb. So they just add a little more connectivity and flow to that, so that there's a little bit more of a challenge to that per se. And then to one of the other structures, they added another net ladder rope climber that they could have on there. So I think that they've done a great job maximizing the use of the space and have added a lot of play features and functionality. So we did talk about a couple other things, but this is what we thought would be the best for the modifications.
Are we using a few less pieces? It looks like our credit line went down about $4,000.
Yeah, they, I don't know exactly which pieces that eliminated. I could, the quotes are included, so it does talk about in this new Plan B modifications, what materials they are reusing. So that's listed as a line item in the quote that's attached here. So it kind of goes through, but there is a little bit less of materials that they are reusing. And so there is a little less of a credit for that.
Is there any space left in here that's we could be utilizing, knowing that we're going to not be adding things in the future with whatever surface we go with? It's going to be as is for its lifetime?
If you look at the CAD layout, I think they've really maximized based on use zones. Really, there's not a lot of additional space for play equipment. I feel like that's pretty been maximized. There are some little pockets, like if we did want to add some stationary items like the dinghy boat, for example, that's just an easy example to provide. You can put those within some of those spaces that you see, given that they don't have a use zone that needs to be met. But from within the existing container space, I think they've really maximized the use zones and the play features that we've added. And just a reminder, right now we just currently have the one piece of equipment in there and a lot of vacant space. So I think that what you're going to see here is a very well-rounded set of equipment with a lot of variety for play.
I think you're doing a nice job. I like the changes so far.
Thank you.
So I've had a little bit of conversation with Jamie, but a few things to bring back to the Parks, Lakes, and Trails. But I'm not in favor of trying to reuse any of the equipment at Lakeside Park and any of our other parks. I don't think 10 to 15-year-old equipment is something we want to try and put back in the park. But it is going to cost money to remove that equipment, and I would really just like to offer that equipment either to one of the schools around here or churches or somebody that may want to just come remove that and have the equipment for, saving us the cost of removal, but, allowing them to have, commercial grade play equipment that I just can't see us trying to put that up in another park. I'd rather buy new equipment and know we have good, solid, safe equipment. So that was one suggestion. I've had a little bit of opportunity to talk to Theme Concepts as well. But one of the things I don't see in here, and I don't know if it's not in the budget right now, but we're trying to get more of an all-inclusive park area. We've got the concrete laying there, trying to contain it within that circle. But on the other side of that sidewalk where the beach is, we could have some type of water, sand, tables. I've seen them at a lot of other parks and other areas, but that would allow, it to still be wheelchair accessible, but, gets that, we're right next to the lake. I mean, it'd be nice to have that water play as well without bringing it down into the lake. So I don't know if that's something that can be talked about or,
Yep.
you know, or prepared for, you know, as that's getting torn up to get, you know, water line, drain line in there. Maybe it's, you know, not this year that it happens, but
Yeah,
in the
and
near future anyway.
Yeah, and I can, excuse me, I can speak to that. That was one of the ideas they did present to us. We did talk about that. There were some, we thought as potentially a phase 2, because you could still add that, like you said, on the side where the sand is. It wouldn't be within the existing container space. But there were a lot of details about that that I think would still need to be discussed and kind of work with Public Works on that of what's a water source and kind of the, how they explained it was, you know, the use of the water, there seemed like some maintenance tasks and responsibilities we'd be responsible for of emptying out the water periodically and just a little bit more detail into that, that we thought of that as a phase 2 option so that it doesn't delay or we can continue moving forward with the project. And then we did talk about considering that as an additional feature that could be easily added in the future, like you said, maybe next year, or, you know, in another year or so.
Kind of,
Oh, go ahead.
sounds kind of like the splash pad idea, you know, it's not in the lake, but it's a water feature there. Where was that location supposed to be?
For the
once-
splash pad?
Once completed,
or-
yeah, the funding process.
The splash pad is to be completed in a separate area, kind of closer to the roundabout as you enter the park, where currently the flagpoles are, and we have our Veterans Memorial with the pavers. So it's adjacent to this, but a different area. What I think Mayor Winnick's referring to is, it was like a water table that can have like the flow of water going down and it recycles through. And it's a table that, you know, you can put it has like a little stream that goes with it. So there just seemed to be some, they're common at, like, I've seen them at children's museums and other areas. They're very, a unique and cool product. We just thought that there was a lot of details to still figure out of the system with Public Works and where the water would come from, and a lot of questions that were still to be figured out there. So it's not, you know, something we've completely disregarded, but just tabled for a phase 2 addition to the structure.
I think there's one in, I can't remember the name of the park, Chains Lake, but in Centerville at the county park there, I believe there's 1 or 2 of that type of interactive feature to maybe model ours after something to go through.
Yep.
2 more things that I'd like to address would be seating areas around the play area for parents. The last thing is that south edge of the park, between that and the townhomes or whatever right next door is, we need to clean that up and police that up a little bit better. Just a bunch of brush and it's kind of a little bit lower area where that, I think there's even a storm drain that comes out into the lake from there. As long as we're, you know, doing stuff here, it'd be nice to have that 100% done rather than just kind of that last 10 or 15 feet gets forgotten about along the lake shore there.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can address both of those with working with Dave, or just even purchasing some additional seating, some benches we can add to this project. That's not a problem.
Well, and might be something community donation-wise too, as far as different benches and that go, but it'd be nice to designate some area there anyway.
Is there a privacy fence up there on that south border?
Part of it, I believe, is, but it ends quite a ways from the lake, if I remember. It's an ugly area that we need to do something with.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay.
So just so for clarification, I know there was some talk about, you just want to make sure that we're using the equipment at this point is no longer on the, I mean, that, do you want the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission to talk about the recycling through theme concepts, or do we want, because there would be some, if you want to donate it to a nonprofit group, we would need to adopt a policy that would allow us to offer that type of donation. So I guess if that's kind of, we would need to track down that donation policy, or do we want to pursue bringing it towards, or having that included in the bid here, because there is a price difference if we go that direction.
I believe all the charities out there that take donated play equipment, you still have to uninstall it, and they come and package it. So we're still paying to uninstall it, at least the ones I'm aware of.
Correct, but I thought the uninstall, if it was gonna get reused, was different than this price on here, correct?
Well, from how I understand it is, I think there's, well, I'll let our city attorney speak to many potential liability or legality issues with giving or donating of equipment. But I know that, I think that they would have to be the ones to come in and do that. But I think there's a whole policy in place that would have to be in place. From what my experience, I know that in other situations, it was advised to not provide it to another community or, another school district because of the liability with that. But maybe Bridget would be able to speak a little bit better about the legality or policy that we might need to have in place.
So we were just mentioning, Mayor, members of the council, obviously, the city has the ability to dispose of surplus equipment, and you've done so recently at several meetings. There was a legislative change just a few years ago that now enables cities to donate surplus equipment to nonprofits if it wants to do so. The statute allows the city to do that, but you have to adopt a policy first that outlines sort of the process and criteria for the donation of the equipment to different nonprofits. So if you want to give the equipment to another municipality or something along those lines, you can. If you want to donate it to a nonprofit, though, you do need to first have this policy in place that essentially spells out how that process would work through. And then if you are going to donate the equipment to another nonprofit, you do want them to sign a waiver saying we're accepting it as is, there's no liability on behalf of the city. So if the equipment, if there's any issue with the equipment, certainly we don't want to have a situation where someone comes back at the city for a liability piece. So if the city wants to look at kind of that potential to donate to a nonprofit, it's not a difficult policy. The league has a model policy. It's certainly something that could be brought back for council consideration at a future work session or council meeting, if that's the direction the council wishes to go.
Yeah, see, I did my own kind of like investigation of the current playground equipment there. The thing looks like new. The stickers from the manufacturer are still on the posts. There's no rust. There's no breakage on any of the platforms or anything. Some of them are racked from the heaving, but they're plastic. So as soon as you remove the poles and adjust the brackets, they're gonna go right back to where they were supposed to be. And what I don't want to happen is that we donate trash or whatever, get rid of that equipment, and you come the very next meeting on the park board and say, we want to spend $100,000 to buy new equipment for a different park. We have parks that, the Dragon's a good example. There's no equipment there, I don't believe, other than the Dragon, is there?
If I may, Ed, we had looked at that at the Parks Commission level, and the cost to relocate that
It
equipment.
was $20,000.
And the cost to replace it with new was about 28.
Relative, yeah, very similar. That was what, we reviewed that about a year ago, and we're considering to relocate that existing equipment to another park that might have a need, and then that cost came in at like $25,000. And then at that time, Parks Trails and Lakes
That was an
Commission-
estimate from the company that's trying to sell you equipment. Is that correct?
And we did get another one recently, and it came in at, Themed Concepts also offered to reinstall at another location, and the estimate for that came in at $34,000. And it's so expensive because they just have the original plan to go off of, so they really have to keep track of which bolts go to which part. They really don't know until they're getting into the removal process of how many parts are damaged and need to be repaired. So they estimated a certain percentage on that as well. So, they did come in at about $34,000 to remove and relocate that to another location. The original investment for this piece of equipment in 2005 was about $50,000. So when you look at that original investment, at that point in time, Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission had thought, well, it might make sense to look at getting new equipment for relatively similar cost. I did talk to so the equipment is Landscape Structures, and it was originally installed by Earl F. Anderson. They did the direct bury, not the proper technique for the proximity to the lake, and that's what's caused the significant stress on the structure over the last few years. So to just the general public or the naked eye, it might look like it's, in good condition, and it truly is. But what I've been told from all of the companies that I've talked to is that really you're going to have to take the whole thing apart, assess and evaluate and inspect all of the components of it to see what's truly damaged, because some of those things can, like the platforms aren't of concern as much, but you just don't know if they're gonna go back to their original shape or form, if they're gonna warp back. And when those play structures start to warp, and they'll create spaces that aren't supposed to be intended for that, and that's where you can get into some level 1 hazards for entanglement, and, you just don't wanna have yourself in that situation. So the long story short is that I was told you'd have to pretty much remove the whole thing, redo the subgrade to do it properly, and put the concrete slab in, and then you could put it back there, but that cost was, pretty significant to do so. They didn't know how far the posts have shifted over however many years, and that's the feedback I had received, so that's where we were standing with, do we relocate it or not? And then this themed concepts offering to reuse and recycle the materials essentially was the next best option that we were provided, given that they can also warehouse the additional materials that we don't use in this project for up to 18 months. If we had another project come up, they can take those additional materials and reuse it into another design as well. So it's a better way than just disposing of it. I think the donation option is great. I wasn't aware of the policy, so I think if that's something that council wants to pursue, I think working with Bridget on that is definitely an option. I know from a removal and project timeline, I think, they'd like to have it removed this year yet and try to get the concrete poured if pending approvals. But I think that could be held off till the spring.
So to be clear, if we were to donate, that credit for using, for 4,000 under Plan B would go away. So at this point, if we donated it, the city would be losing out on that $4,000 credit.
But they're charging us $6,500 to remove it.
We still have to pay for removal in order to donate. Dan, I think you're gonna say something along that line? Do all the donation?
Well, I think kind of, what I'm hearing is that there's a potential that this is a, kind of a time-sensitive thing. I'm assuming if we go with the recycling credit, they would need some of those parts to build the pieces for installation next spring. I think what we could do is maybe reach out to some of the local nonprofits, see if there is any interest to kind of gauge that. If there is, maybe pursue that route. I think on the removal of the existing playground, that expense that's in there, assuming that the nonprofit is able to come in and take the equipment, they may be the one that then would direct the removal of the equipment. So that cost could potentially go away, but for sure the credit that we're getting for the recycling component of it goes away. And if you look at the recycling, we paid $50,000 for the equipment 15 years ago? 13 years ago. We're getting about 10% back on that, so we are getting, some credit back on that aspect of it. I guess just kind of if we want this project to kind of go in for a 19 spring install, we would want to kind of exhaust if we're going to donate and make that decision rather quickly, so we're not having to hold up. And also, if we end up at the end of the day not able to donate to a nonprofit, we don't want to leave that $4,000 credit on the table if we could just reuse that. So, I guess as the interim, we could go through and just do a couple outreaches to see if there is any interest in the nonprofit marketplace for a donation of this. Okay?
I personally think it's gonna tie up too much time. We wanna keep fast moving. I think, my understanding is we're gonna be on the hook for that removal expense either way. And then we lose out on a $4,000 credit and risk tying up the project longer. So I like the idea of reusing, because again, like Ed pointed out, that was the initial thought, to maybe relocate this to another park till it came to be about 90% of the cost of a new piece of equipment that isn't at half-life. So
Right.
I think we're already on course for the best direction. That's the way I'm looking at it. And they're willing to hold for how long?
They will, so after the removal, which is the $6,450, they will warehouse that for up to 18 months, and I'm sure that is something we could talk about if needed for longer. They'll use assuming we go with the reuse and recycle model, they'll reuse the specified pieces of equipment, and then they can incorporate the other materials into a future design if we had another project that came up. So I know we're, talking about a few other park projects, and I know cost of materials is also increasing pretty rapidly with some changes going on. So, it's a good way to potentially save some costs on future projects as well if we have those materials, so they can reuse those posts in other projects. And, it could be a year, within the next year, cost of materials could go up again pretty significantly. So, could save costs there too.
for the rest of the council, it's really the posts that are holding the value that we're gonna get that credit for. And as we talked about doing other projects like Belts or Southview, if we went with theme concepts again on something, they would be putting their decorative wrap of whatever theme we went with around those. We could be saving more down the road.
No, I understand where everything's coming from. I just, you know, we're spending a lot of money. This is our premier park. I think you all agree, I'm not one that advocates spending a whole lot of money too often. But, you know, they're 15-year-old posts too. And we don't know how corroded they are on the inside. I don't think any company that would reuse them, including Theme Concepts, but they're not gonna warranty that 3 years from now when that post breaks off because it was rusted away.
But I thought they are reusing them.
Currently, they are.
Suggesting that now, I'm saying we should just
Oh,
give the whole thing
I
away.
agree, I agree.
Let somebody take the whole thing if they want it, if not, but let's start with everything brand new. I mean, you know, that $4,000 or $5,000 that we could save, I would rather have everything brand new at that park and just,
Got it.
instead of, you know, yeah, I understand trying to save a few dollars.
No, I
but-
understand you differently now than I did the first
Okay,
time.
So, yeah, we're clarifying that a little bit more. So I would like to say, you know, offer this whole playground to somebody that would like it. If it doesn't leave us in any type of liability, and let's start with all brand-new stuff, because to try, you know, and we had the conversation, to try and reuse it, you know, it's 15 years old, and it's just gonna cost too much. I mean, yeah, if we were a church group or a private school, we could get a few parents to come do it, and everybody's happy, but this is a city, and we have to run under certain ways, and it costs 10 times more than it should. So that's kind of what I was saying was, let's go all new, and let's, you know, hopefully we can cut out the $6,400 removal expense, but just donate it to somebody. That's my thought on it. That's where I would like to see it go. I think we have a reasonable time to offer this to somebody without slowing down the project. But I think we can do that. That's where I'm at with it. The other thing is, I'm gonna bring it up right now because it's not on here, but the cost of the flooring. That $85,000 or $75,000, whatever it was, that's gotta come down. That's gotta come down significantly because that's just a crazy amount of money to look at spending just for a rubber mat on there. And
Yep, and we're working on with a few different providers, so we've had some in-depth conversations, so still working on that. That'll certainly come back to Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission with the final cost on that, and then to council when that's approved, but still working on that piece of it right now.
Sure. Yeah.
And a question I had is for Dan. Theme Concepts, their financial situation is resolved, not resolved, or what do you know?
I haven't heard any updates on it. I mean, so, you know, based on before, I mean, I'm confident if you go through with these processes that there'd be enough, you know, I don't have any major issues with proceeding with these bids as presented based on any of that, so.
Sure.
And then, one other comment, and that it doesn't pertain to this equipment, because I don't have a problem with the equipment. I think it's a great plan. I still would like to see something for an older age group. I'd like to see some zip lines or something going into the lake, maybe a plastic tube going into the lake, something for older children, or not children, but adolescents.
Yes, and we, a lot of those conversations will be coming back to the table here for the Belts Park discussion, and there are a lot of things like the zip line, like you referred to, that we can look at adding to other parks in the community. So we are having those conversations again here in the near future to target that age demographic.
But I would like to make use of the lake, is what I really would like to do. I would make that to be a destination. You're coming down there specifically because they have zip lines or they have something that goes into the water.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other discussion, or you got enough to bring back to the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission for now? And
Yep, and I'll be meeting with them tomorrow, so I'll share your input and feedback.
all right, thank you.
Okay, can you do it for me? Okay.
Tiller.
All right, so do you want me to go on to the next?
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
waiting for you guys to get ready.
He's gonna get this,
No, our computers-
situated here, but, I could start talking about the Fenway Park update while we get some visuals ready to go. So Fenway Park, last season, the Fenway Complex, it was brought to the city's attention that there were some maintenance concerns with the field quality, less than 50% turf on Field 5, which is our baseball field. Pretty much the whole complex. I did have the Minnesota Sodding Company out last August and just provided a professional analysis of the field conditions. So we identified it from the city's perspective that we did need to make some modifications to the maintenance out at Fenway and worked through that process. I'm happy to report that since the improvements that took place starting last September, we had Mogren aeration out at Fenway, and they did a fantastic job doing some quick field restoration last fall. We were lucky with some nice weather and the right conditions, so we were able to turn the fields around pretty significantly by the end of last season, and then had a new maintenance provider effective. They started about mid-April with the snow we had. So mid-April, they came in and took over fertilization, weed control, and mowing of the Fenway Park Athletic Complex. So happy to report that we've had a really great turnaround, really great season out at Fenway. I'll go through just a couple pictures here from the season. I don't have the before pictures, but it was, less than 50% turf and very dry conditions. A lot of that was stemmed from, lack of fertilization and improper irrigation. Our City of Public Works staff did a great job repairing our whole irrigation system. I think there was one or two minor irrigation issues and they got resolved right away this year, maybe a broken head or a small leak that was taken care of. So everything went really well. Here's a picture that was provided by the Forest Lake Area Athletic Association, kind of highlighting the complex. These were the pictures from October of 2017. So this is just after we did the field restoration. So this is the baseball Field 5 infield. So they did a really great job coming in and restoring the field quality. And then these are some additional pictures from this past summer. I did provide some quotes. These are from FLA representatives, primarily coaches from baseball, football, or lacrosse. So some of the feedback, it was much better this season. Other communities have come in from Shoreview, Centennial, Chisago, Roseville, and commented that it was in great shape and a really nice field. The field was able to be played on through the fall baseball season, and it was one of the best fields they've played on this season. A couple more pictures here. It was in such good shape, we tried to utilize it to get our home tournament this year, but Schumacher was too wet to continue, but this definitely couldn't have happened last year. And the communication between FLA and the maintenance provider was at the top level, and everything was very good. So I think we had a really positive experience out at Fenway. We did have, I know Sam had referred to our Fenway Advisory Board meeting we held on October 8th. Al Hauge, the president of FLA, as well as Paul Kozak, who's on the executive board, and myself and Sam met and had a very positive meeting, working on getting some concrete slabs poured for the porta potties, a storage containment, and a small storage shed. So that'll be done yet this year. So we'll be ready to go right off the bat in the spring. Just show you a couple pictures here really quick that also came in, assuming this works here. Well, my computer froze, but I mean, that highlights overall that everything has gone well out at Fenway. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Jamie. I think you should mention, we're running, in the running for Field of the Year.
Oh, yeah, I am applying for, thank you. I am submitting a application for the Field of the Year Award, which is an annual award offered by the Minnesota Park and Sports Turf. So I'll have that submitted by Friday, and primarily for Field 5, the turnaround on that field, and pretty much then the whole complex, you know, you add in about that. So I will keep you posted on that, but I am submitting the City of Forest Lake for that opportunity.
And the Field 5 infield, was that all resodded, or was that just restored?
It was restored, so Mogren Aeration came in and they aerated it, overseeded it, fertilized it, gave it, you know, a lot of water and nutrients that it really needed. And I think that field restoration was a key to the turnaround. And then I think Walker Enterprises coming in, keeping up with the fertilization and the irrigation that was required to have healthy turf out at the complex. I think they did a great job mowing at the certain height. And I think Flaw might have, I think they also changed some of their techniques with dragging the fields to help keep the field quality top notch. A couple of the other things that we did improve, I mostly highlighted the field conditions. So we improved those safety conditions, but we did also remove any dead landscaping, and we put some extra sod out there. City Public Works worked on the landscape beds. The entryways cleaned up quite a bit, so a lot of other things. And then I also wanted to thank the Forest Lake Area Athletic Association for, and their volunteers, they repainted the concession stand building this summer, and it looks fantastic. So thanks to them for making that improvement out there. And so it's overall looking really nice.
All right, great. Any questions or comments for Jamie? I know we got a couple of very knowledgeable people on the parks, lakes, and trails when it comes to turf and fertilization, and I think it was great to be able to tap into those resources as well as we had the issues last year, and
Absolutely.
I think we got a great result out of that, so thank you. Any other? No? All right, let's move on. Update on the land purchase.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, this is just more of a formal update. I know this has been kind of talked about during both the council and staff update section of meetings, and just kind of wanted to give council the latest as to where the EDA is in the potential land purchase. So back in the summer, the city was approached by a landowner who'd offered the 34-acre chunk that you see highlighted here on this map to the city for purchase for a possible business park expansion. The thought process behind it was the city currently has some industrial land down by the airport. Most of those lots are in the 4-acre size. A lot of the requests that are coming through right now for land, for lot sizes, are more in the 5 to 10 acre size, and we don't really have anything that's currently positioned in that market. As I've told the EDA, I don't have like a list of potential developers at this point who are like lining up to purchase this, but that's just kind of what we're seeing coming across the wire right now, is more of those 5 to 10 acre size parcels. So the EDA has looked at this and is currently doing a study to see, is this parcel developable, and what would you end up getting at the end of that process in terms of lot layouts, lot sizes, what we'd be able to bring to market if this actually goes through the development process. Washington County CDA right now is currently offering a grant program to help kind of answer some of those questions, like what are the infrastructure costs, what are, just some of those pre-development questions, to basically eliminate some of those what-if costs and try to make these parcels more marketable or try to spur some development. So what the EDA did, the EDA actually has applied for and was awarded a grant with the Washington County CDA through the work that's outlined here. Basically, Bolton and Mink will develop 2 conceptual layouts for the lot, and then is also going to engage MnDOT on the proposed concept and what the connection would be required for 97. Just do some high-level utility connections to the parcel. So again, we can start to have some of these conversations as to what the full development cost is, because bear in mind that the price of land is only one cost of a lot more. So once you purchase the parcel, you may end up having to take on additional development costs. This will provide a bigger picture, a better cost estimate of what that will be to develop. And then they're going to just do a review of it to see what the potential wetlands impact would be and what we would need for wetland mitigation on the site. The proposed timeline is that we're hoping to have the preliminary results back by November 5th, so the EDA can consider on November 5th some of what these preliminary costs are going to be. The final assessment that Bolton Minnick's working on will be turned back in by the end of November. This initial EDA grant work will actually help guide if the city involves, it gets an assessment done on the property, because when I spoke with the assessor, they view this as transitional land. This is not something that you can go like with a house and just go find a bunch of comparables, because it's raw land that the future use is going to be business park, so it's tough to go find comparables that are in the market. In talking with the assessor, they basically said they would look at, what the proposed uses are going to be, what's the lot size, kind of these exact questions that we're having answered here. So basically, once we get the preliminaries here, we'll turn that over to the assessor. They'll develop a scope, what the cost the assessments are going to be. So then we'll have a fairly good idea of what the true development costs are going to be. And you can back in to say, if we get 3 lots out of here, here are the lot sizes, here's about what you would see in the market, for a price point. One thing I have told the EDA, I was at a conference where Greater MSP was there, and the representative from Greater MSP had basically told all the government officials that were in the room, saying that they're getting a lot of requests for government-owned land. Like a lot of developers coming in saying, what's currently city-owned, what's currently under municipal control. He floated that out there by basically saying, we're getting a lot of requests. He goes, but on the back end of that, those are always followed up with, we want to make a deal, we don't want to pay market price, we want some sort of pretty good, incentives to go in and develop in that community. But they are seeing a lot of requests for city-owned parcels or municipal-owned parcels that are in the market. So we're basically at this point trying to develop full development costs. We'll know more, hopefully the preliminary on November 5th, and kind of have a better cost estimate of what it would take and what we'd get out of the end results based on that by the end of November. Additionally, this map doesn't show up, but we're also looking at this little triangle down here is an additional 6 acres of city-owned land that's going to be worked into the kind of the oversight that there as well. So it's just the 34 plus the additional 6 that the city currently owns. So that's just kind of the update, a little bit of time frame. Moving forward, we'll start to see what those cost estimates are for development of this parcel.
Do you know who owns the land north and south of Interstate Companies there? To the east?
This over here is owned by Herrick Properties, and the parcel north is
Premier Bank.
Premier Bank.
Was possible public works location part of any of the preliminary development drawings? Right?
No.
Not in this location.
No, I think we've kind of talked about Public Works potentially going wherever we put a tower. And that's going to be a little bit potentially south of Headwaters is, I think, the newer concept for that anyway. But, I mean, yeah, this could have some of that potential as well. But, having some larger parcels to offer, I think, once we get, appraisals back, I think I think this is gonna come in at a very attractive price for developers. It will also tie in, I think the way, Ryan, you were looking at it, potentially having a tie-in with the Herrick property as far as, common water, sewer, road type utilities.
So as we previously discussed, sewer has to come from Forest Road to serve the properties. Water main, we have some options. Obviously, we don't want to leave a parcel landlocked, so we'll have to provide future stub dead-end road, temporary cul-de-sac, and/or show kind of in a larger, greater picture how some roads could be extended to connect all this area in the long run. But focus is to look at this parcel in a triangle south to fit, probably looking at, some of the schematics just we quick threw up there and talked at the EDA. What size, how big of 3 commercial industrial lots could you generate out of this site now? And then with the road and utility connections, how you could serve a greater area in the future.
And there are the other 2 outlots that would be there that, could obviously see future development if the industrial park goes through, and part of that will be the layout of the roads that are going to be in there.
I think it's a great idea to move forward with the project. The only other business park opportunity we have is down on 180th, and we all know it's not going to be anytime soon.
Yeah, we have to start developing some more commercial land, so I think this is a start, a smaller start, but, you know, it's a step in the right direction to get something going.
It's a good location. You have interstate companies there. It's not a main drag. We don't want to have, you know, too much pedestrian traffic next to the airport. You don't want homes there that have to put up with the noise. So,
Well, and we get to utilize 6 acres of existing city-owned property outside the airport zone that is otherwise gonna be landlocked and never developed for anything. So, you know, especially if you include that in the overall development scheme.
Just quick clarification, so with the grant that was received from Washington County, EDA is out nothing, was it a
It's
fully
80/20,
funded?
so they pay, it was like $1,900 is what they committed towards the project.
Sorry, how much?
1,900.
Okay.
So the CDA from Washington County paid 80%, because it was less than 10,000. If they'd gone over $10,000, then I believe it
Got it.
was a different price, I don't have it, but there's a different match point over 10,000.
So there's a small participation from the
Yeah,
EDA?
small participation.
Okay. I think it's worth looking at. I think that there's some, it'll be interesting to see what comes back on costs, and we can have conversation from there, but until that study's done, it's tough to know.
how many acres is there again?
The main parcel is 34 here, and then there's additional 6, so you're looking at roughly 40, plus or minus a little bit.
What's that piece in the center?
That's a private parcel. There's 2 private parcels that are in, or one here and one here, like, that are carved out of it.
Now, the larger one's like a 5-acre parcel, I believe.
Do you know how wide that span is between the two of them? Is that enough to get a road through?
That is a road easement.
Okay, so,
That comes right out with,
Yeah, that's
Fondant
the
on the
line
other
right
side.
there. Yep.
But is that gonna be part of that's not part of the initial study, is it? Anything working with MinDOT as far as
Yep.
road layout?
So got several inquiries into MinDOT right now. I did talk to one representative, but I'm waiting to hear from their boss of what ultimately would be required to serve these improvements on 97. So we can incorporate that into the study as well.
This is the challenge of alignment with, is it fondant, or like whatever MinDOT's gonna require for an alignment there? Is that that's part of,
Yep.
okay.
All right, any other questions, or? All right, anything else?
Turnaround by early November? Is that,
We were given the go-ahead Thursday, so we started on it today. So,
All right. Anything else to bring up? No new business?
I got a couple other things just to bring up here, so. 88 transition plans, I don't know how much of you paid attention to all that stuff, or aware of it. You know, previously, there were requirements to do them, nobody really did them, therefore, they came out with some stricter thresholds to get the stuff done, especially, you know, FHA, WA is working to ensure that all agencies receiving federal funds are working towards meeting those requirements and expectations. And then, since we have a project in the Transportation Improvement Program, you know, they're obviously signaled in on us. We're a public agency of 50 employees or more. And moving forward, the Met Council regional solicitation will certify that selected projects are in compliance with this requirement as well. So just want to bring this up now. We talked about potentially showing the rough draft, working with Dave on some of the policies internally to incorporate and, you know, make sure we're moving forward. We have completed an inventory of all the pedestrian ramps within the city. So at some point, we're gonna have to go through and do some public engagements, probably present this at a workshop before we do that, but we're gonna have to have some comment period. Certainly, a public open house will have and stuff like that, just so there, you go through that portion of the requirement of the plan too, but just wanna kinda give you a heads up. That's on the horizon. It is a requirement based on our city and the funding that we have received in the past and want to continue to receive in the past, so that's at this point.
Does that only apply to, I guess, transportation publicly, or is that city buildings and everything?
Stuff within public right away.
Okay.
So. Not such good news is we've received some preliminary scoring on the regional solicitation on the application for the underpass bridge. We got a 613 out of 1,000, so not where we wanted to be. We've scored low in average share of students population that bikes and walks, student population within the school's walkshed, connection to disadvantaged populations and project benefits, impacts and mitigation, and cost effectiveness. We did score high in housing performance scores, well, not high, but all right there. High in gaps and barriers, deficiency, safety, public engagement process, and risk assessment, we scored perfect. So right now we are sitting 7th, which, to be honest, you're probably not looking at funding through the solicitation unless something changes in the final scoring, but top schools, or top projects were Minneapolis, St. Paul, Apple Valley, Bloomington, South St. Paul, and West St. Paul. So that's where we're at right now. Basically, then that would leave a $1.5 million deficiency or gap in funding for the underpass. There is a solicitation that we could submit an intent by the end of the month, but that has a $300,000 max. There's also another grant we were going to apply regardless of the underpass stuff, LRIP grants. We were use that successfully to construct Headwaters Parkway. So in the last bonding cycle, they allocated additional funding for the LRIP, which at that time, everybody thought it was just going to go to all the existing projects in the application process already. Here, September-ish, they kind of did a curveball and said they're going to reopen it. So reopening it means their application will be open in December, and we would apply for that regardless because we can use that on our local share, part of the roundabout anyways. But we don't know the details of what they're going to reopen that as because of the money that's been allocated for it is obviously not as great as the first original 2 solicitations that they've done with that. So that's kind of where we're at. You know, last time they did the preliminary scoring on this, that we were successful through the Met Council regional solicitation. We already knew we scored high enough that we were guaranteed the money. So it's just tough to compete. It looks like, you know, it's kind of luck of the draw, whether it was a score and they scored metro projects higher than out metro, or is it because we've also had a number of safe routes to school or federal money here recently. You know, I just can't, we can't control some of that stuff. So the one part that we scored pretty low in how we relate to the disadvantaged populations, obviously in this neighborhood compared to what we could write up with in the, you know, west of here in the neighborhoods and the number of apartment unit complexes and stuff like that. So we generated a lot more of that better score. So that's what I know on that, but some good news. Highway 97 North Shore Trail. We had a nice meeting with MnDOT to talk about that a little further after one of our project management team meetings for the Goodview project. They're still moving forward with their project at North Shore Trail, which will be a 2020 construction project. One thing to keep on the lookout is we've talked about lighting there, and they've gone through the warrant review, and it doesn't meet warrants for lighting. However, MnDOT has a program where they can fund the lighting and do basically 2 Cobra heads, and this is typical out in the rural area anywhere we have lighting through MnDOT. They would generate a cooperative agreement that the city would own and maintain the lights, just like we do with Excel and stuff like that. But they would actually go through the design process, so you'd have better lighting than just going through our typical permit. Hey, Excel can put a light up on the power pole kind of thing, right? It is going to include a designated left turn lane for both directions on North Shore Trail and down to Keswick. And then also they're extending the project and striping and mill and overlay out down westward to Kiawant. That'll then eliminate that yellow hatched area there where a lot of people are confused. Do I go in there, do I turn, or do I stay in the through lane and not get rear-ended kind of thing? So that'll extend the project down there, so certainly be some nice improvements there. Fill not as tight, it'll allow safety and more space for maneuverability, much better signage and striping, road widths, and lighting at the intersection. So we're still on pace there for 2020. Dan was part of the email. It's 26 megs, their layout, so I just snipped out some blown up areas. If you guys want to see this, you know, I can just pass these down. You can kind of see what's going on. I just got 4 copies here, but nice improvement, no local share in the project, so that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
So on our scoring for the underpass, isn't that kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of we don't have students biking to school because we don't have an underpass? And how do they factor that in? Is it projected based on population after the project is in place, or are they looking at who's biking now?
There's
Do
a
we
lot
know
of-
who's biking?
And, you know, we talked about that, and that's how, you know, one area we thought we did really well and unique in the first one, because school didn't allow it, because, well, they didn't have the facilities to do so, and, you know, you talk about that, but it's one of those things that,
I think that's our final score in that area, or is there some improvement?
we
that
reviewed
could
some
be
stuff
done?
that's, we wondered why, we don't know if we could have wrote anything differently. We do have inquiries into MnDOT.
No, I don't think so. I think Forest
Ryan,
Lake is another half.
going forward, you know, we don't, what do we do if the underpass is obviously not going to be funded? Are we mandated to either put a bridge or an underpass, or can we go back to crosswalks, kind of?
You're not required, but if the project moves forward as just a roundabout, MnDOT groups within MnDOT would most likely require just your traditional crossings at a roundabout that you see, you know, at grade.
At the time we talked about that, I think we kind of decided for the opportunity to do something and then to have that underpass, I think was price tagged around 1 million. We were willing to go forward with it with or without funding, if I remember correctly.
And I still think it's a better solution than crossing a roundabout.
Agree.
Or
Or an
a
expensive bridge.
Or a
top
bridge.
that, yeah, is 2 to 3 times as much. I think it's just kind of sad that they score based on valuing one group of kids more important than another group of kids. You know, yeah, I mean, there are underprivileged that need opportunities, but when you're talking about safety, I think it flat out disgusts me that they can consider one group more important than another. That should never even be counted into a calculation like that, but, you know, those are the parameters I guess they set up. Switch gears, it's nice to hear about North Shore Drive, but that's still a potential, and it's a potential for a couple of years from now. But in the meantime, I think it would be nice to give at least an ask for Dave or whatever to pursue a couple of 2, 3, 4 lights out there. Just, if it saves one person from a bad accident or worse, it's well worth it. And I would like to at least get some numbers back, what it would cost to put a couple poles in there, temporary.
Okay.
I can contact Excel Design and they can write me up a quote. I'll have them look in the intersection and tell them what we're looking for, and hopefully I can get it within it's a couple week turnaround. I'll bring it back to you.
Well, and given the, you know, the frost coming up, I mean, if it's within, you know, $5,000 or something, do we want to just go ahead with it, or
Yeah.
something like that? I mean, do we want to kind of just, you know, if it's over that, maybe come back to the council. If not, just give them the green light.
Sounds good.
Certainly.
Is that okay with you guys?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's fine with me.
All right,
Absolutely.
sounds good. Ryan, you got anything else for us?
Still a lot of construction going on. Headwaters area, Headwaters Place.
Second Street, is that,
Is that
or
done?
Second Avenue coming together good?
Subcut's done.
I seen that today.
Sand, I think they finished today, but we'll be moving to Class 5 tomorrow, and final grade, and I'm hoping they can get curb in by Thursday with the projected rain that Dave's talking about Friday.
Dave, you gotta quit projecting that rain.
Maybe it makes them move faster.
You could have said
Which one of you
snow.
guys is in charge?
I'll take the rain over snow right now.
All right, if we don't have anything else, we'll look for a motion to adjourn.
No moved.
You have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.